everybody. It's James Lindsay. You're listening to New Discourses Bullets, where I give you a single kind of bullet point summary of a single topic from woke Marxism that we need to understand so we can beat it. And I want to talk about another old saying about communism today. And that old saying is that communists are very good at conquest, but they're very bad at management. And this has been phrased in a variety of ways. I don't know who started the phrase, but it's very simple. Communists are good at conquest and they're bad at management. What that means is, I did a long podcast a long time ago called Communism Doesn't Know How. I have a bunch of merch of that type. You can go buy it. Communism Doesn't Know How. And it doesn't know how is really what this old saying reflects. The saying, again, is communism is good at conquest. In other words, it's good at taking things over, but it's not good at management. I recently did a Bullet podcast where I discussed kind of the takeover pathway, where I said that it follows this kind of predictable course where first they demand access to your institution and you say, well, that's fair and reasonable. But according to what I've recently learned, there is this thing in woke thought called the access accommodation dyad. In other words, access and accommodation are seen as two parts of the same thing. So it's not enough for them to be given access that they demand. To be given access is to also have to accommodate them. Now, the Marxist or the woke or whatever you want, because it's the same thing, disposition is that once you admit them access, you have to accommodate their political views because their whole program is that they conflate their political views with who they are. And so if you're a woman, you are a feminist politically. If you are whatever they call LGBTQ, then you are a queer activist. That's how they see the world. And therefore, for you to admit access is for you to also have to grant accommodation, not to some, issue like their disability status or something like that, but for their political ideology. So it's access, and access brings accommodation. And by the way, that's the idea of belonging and inclusion in your DEI programs. Diversity is access, and then inclusion is and belonging are accommodation. You have to accommodate their political ideology. Every time they claim offense, you have to change the rules, because what they will say they're a feminist, is that when you say something that disagrees with feminism, they'll say you're making this space uncomfortable for women. We're not going to rehash that whole podcast. Sorry. It goes from access to accommodation, and that's literally called the access accommodation dyad in their thought. It's a dialectical maneuver. And once they have accommodation, they then use that accommodation to angle for power. They then try to expand their influence. And this is really the thrust of what I want to talk about today, by demanding a seat at the table. And when they get a seat at the table, they manipulate the power they have been granted, not only to produce more accommodation for their ideology, but to also get more of their people put into positions of power. I encourage you to read Counter Woke Craft, which was by Charles Pincourt with my help, published by New Discourses a couple of years ago, to get an idea of how this can work kind of in institutional settings in detail. It's covered in rather tremendous detail in chapter 2 of that book. In chapter 3 is what to do about it. So check that out. Once they get a seat at the table, they expand their influence at the table. In other words, they demand to run the table, and then they demand to run the entire organization. And so what you're seeing is a model of conquest where their goal is to take management positions that they have, first of all, and this isn't the point, no capacity to hold. They don't know how to manage, because their religious belief as Marxists at the fundamental bottom of their religious belief is it will work when everybody believes it. So their agenda when they have power is not to run things, which they don't know how to do. It's to make sure everybody believes it, because it will work when everybody believes it. So you purge everybody who doesn't believe it. When it doesn't work, you go on witch hunts to figure out who are the people who don't believe it enough and purge them, and so on and so forth. That's the communist way. It happens at every scale, from institution all the way up to nation. It happens within families even. That's the whole communist program. But it's beyond the fact that they don't know how. And that's what I think this phrase, communism is good at conquest, so it can take over your institution, and that's how, or at least one way how, but it's bad at management. That has a more fundamental it's a more fundamental reason behind it. It's correct, but it's cheap to say, well, they just don't know what they're doing, and their goal is only to make more communists, to spread the ideology. It's, in a sense, an evangelistic religion where its only real task is the Great Commission of Communism, which is to go spread communist belief. In other words, what they believe they're doing is waking people up to their true nature. Marx believed man's true nature is socialist. Queer theorists believe man's true nature is queer. We could go all the way down. Critical race theorists believe that man's true nature is anti-racist. So on and so forth. So the entire program, I wrote an entire chapter in race Marxism about how CRT works and what it does. I gave an entire lecture on that. That was, I think, the most popular out of that series from July 21, which preceded race Marxism, where I explained that the entire purpose of critical race theory is to make more critical race theorists. That's it. It's to capture institutions and mismanage them to the production of more critical race theory and more critical race theorists until the institutional capital is spent down and collapsed. That's it. And if they can't take over an institution to use it to make more critical race theory and more critical race theorists, then they kill the institution. They, call it racist until they control it or destroy it. That's the whole program. Same thing with queer theory, homophobia, transphobia, and so on. Same thing with Marxist. Bourgeois value, selfishness, counter-revolutionary sentiment, bad elements, the whole thing. Exact same model. They're very good at conquest. But the reason they're so bad at management is because they're not even interested in managing things. They are interested in controlling things. They have no interest in the operations involved in running anything. All they want is control, and then they force their religious views on everybody once they gather enough institutional power to do so. That's the whole ball of wax. It might sound like they're very interested in managing in that case, but they're not, because they're not interested in the operational management of, say, a company or, say, a professional society. A couple quick examples. Boeing. That's an aircraft manufacturer. Boeing's job is to manufacture airplanes that work. That's it. Safe and effective airplanes. That's their job. That's their mandate. That is their program. Marxists or wokes or whoever that take over Boeing are not interested in making aircraft. They are interested in using Boeing's resources to make Marxists. That's it. That's all. They are not interested in managing an aircraft manufacturer. They are interested in managing an institution to turn it into a church of woke or church of Marxism. So they're not even interested in managing a thing for the thing. They're interested in controlling the environment. So they want to seize the means of production of whatever that institution is, and they kind of play act or cosplay it, say making aircraft or doing whatever the institution does, but their real purpose is to spread communism. This is why they are bad at management, because they're not trying to manage the thing, the institution. They are trying to use the thing to do something else. It's a fundamental misdirection of purpose and resources. Here's a second example. I recently stumbled across this fact. We are hearing a lot about the organization WPATH, which stands for World Professional Association of Transgender Health. It is an activist organization pretending to be a medical authority. The medical association has doctors and everything else associated with it. And it has laid out all of these guidelines that are horrific. They're under a lot of fire. There was the WPATH files by Mia Hughes. There's now the WPATH tapes that have come out from the Daily Caller News Foundation. They're under a lot of fire for a lot of reasons, and the whole thing looks like it could possibly collapse on them. But WPATH has been taken as the standard for all kinds of medical interventions around what they call transgender health. Gender-affirming care is one of the names for these things. Now, obviously, it's a catastrophe. We see that it's a disaster. We see that it's not only probably the largest child abuse scandal in at least modern history, maybe ever, it's also quite blatantly a crime against humanity. But what in the world, why is this interesting now? Well, it turns out, for example, that there's a professional society that regulates, or that represents, I should say, endocrinologists. That's called the Endocrine Society. If you're an endocrinologist who is somebody, you're probably a member of the Endocrine Society. You probably read their publications or go to their conferences, or at least are aware of what they're doing. So they wrote a report on transgender health. This would be considered authoritative in regard to the endocrine aspects, so puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, etc., in so-called gender-affirming care. Well, guess what? 9 out of 10 of the people who wrote this report, who are officials in the Endocrine Society, are WPATH members. It's wholly corrupt. So why did I bring this up? Because what you see is that when wokes or Marxists are given that access, they are not interested in making your organization work better or do better. It doesn't matter what your organization is. They are interested in demanding access, then demanding accommodation for their political beliefs, and then, most importantly, making their way into power positions that they can't manage, because their goal is to control the organization, to turn it to their purposes, not to the purposes that it exists for. The Endocrine Society does not exist to push queer Marxist propaganda. It does not exist for that purpose, but it's been captured by these activists who do that. And so this is one of the points I wanted to make. They aren't just bad at management, being good at conquest. They aren't interested either in doing the job itself, which they don't know how to do. It's not just that communists don't know how. It's that they don't want to. They have no interest in doing the thing. They have no interest in learning to do the thing. They only want to learn to do the thing far enough where they can pretend to do the thing. We see this with a lot of university professors. They pretend to be educated. They pretend to be professors, but they're actually just activists pushing their garbage. And as such, their trajectory, and we see this, for example, with Claudine Gay. You think, oh, you should talk about plagiarism. I'm not going to talk about plagiarism. I'm going to talk about the fact that she was president of Harvard and only managed to publish like a dozen papers or dozen and a half papers, something like that, a very small number of academic papers in her career, which is actually not uncommon in these kinds of positions. Their goal is not to get in to do the thing. Their goal is to get in to become a bureaucratic cog in the machine. They are angling for those positions of power. They are getting into the Endocrine Society specifically to become 9 out of the 10 members who write the report, or to get into a company to become the members of the Human Resources Office, the HR office, that's going to control how things work. They're working to get into positions to where they can control the apparatus to make it make more communists. And so this is what's at the heart of the saying that's, I think, facially true, that communists are good at conquest, but they're bad at management. And I want you to remember that, though, when we look around at things. Communists are good at conquest. They're good at taking things over. They have very good strategies, very good tactics. They're all evil, but they're very effective. So when I say good, I mean effective. I don't mean morally or ethically appropriate. They're in fact filled with lies and manipulations and deceits. That's a whole other, 10-hour podcast right there. But they are not good at managing, not just because they can't, not just because they don't know how, but because they don't want to. They have no interest in it. Their religion is predicated, one more time, on the belief that when everybody fully wakes up to who they truly are, which is to say a woke or a Marxist or queer, then everything will just start working. The whole utopia, the horizon of potentialities, or whatever frickin' words they use for it, will come to be, and everything will be just fine. So that's the saying, and that's why it's the case. Communists, last time to say it again, are good at conquest, and they're bad at management. That's what's all behind it.